Hi guys, welcome to Nairobi Legal. My name is Rogers Gedinji, and in this video we are going to be focusing on defamation in Kenya. Now, as a law student, you might have encountered someone either on Facebook, Snapchat, Instagram, claiming that they're going to sue someone else for defamation. And so, in that regard, the goal of this video is for you to be able to understand what does defamation mean in the Kenyan context, and what elements does a person need to prove so that they can win a case as far as defamation law is concerned. The other thing is that by the end of this video, you should be in a position to distinguish defamation from entrapment and false light. And so with that brief introduction, the law of defamation concerns false statements that lower someone's reputation. So remember these two words: the statement has to be false and it's harming someone's reputation. Now, defamatory statements can either be written or spoken. And what I mean by a written defamatory statement is that this statement can be published in a newspaper or a magazine in a permanent form, while spoken defamation, which we term as slander, can be oral in the sense that it could occur through a radio show, it could occur through an Instagram live story or a Snapchat live story. So that is what we call slander. It is in an oral form. Someone actually speaks. Now, an example here to put oral defamation in context: if a lecturer in class refers to Kate as a drug dealer, but Kate has never actually sold drugs, then in this case that lecturer has slandered Kate. So that amounts to oral defamation. Now, with this introduction and outline, there are 4 elements to a defamation case. Now, again, you might wonder, what does an element mean? So an element is something that the plaintiff, or rather the complainant, must prove to win a case on defamation. Now, moving ahead, when it comes to defamation again, this defamatory statement must be able, or rather tend to lower the complainant's reputation in the estimation of right-minded persons in society, meaning that after hearing this statement about you, I can be able to avoid you, or I can be able to view you differently. I mean, the way I used to respect you, before I respected you, I held you with high regard, but suddenly your reputation has reduced. I no longer actually respect you, and I can even avoid you because of the statement that was said about you. So in other words, what I'm trying to mean here is that the words complained of must be shown to have injured the person's reputation and character. This goes to show that abusive words may not actually be defamatory, meaning that just because I'm abusing you, it does not necessarily mean that people are going to see you with a lower reputation in society. So abusive words may not be defamatory on face value. Moving ahead, these words must be shown to have been construed by the audience as defamatory and not simply abusive. Again, just to emphasize that when you say that statement that is considered defamatory, it must be interpreted by the audience, as the public, as though it is actually defamatory and not simply abusive. And so in this regard, in the Kenyan context, the cases that you can consider reading is the case of John versus Edward, or rather John Edward versus Standard, and the Joseph case versus Charles. So these cases bring out the elements that you can show, or rather prove, so that you can win a case on defamation in Kenya. And so the first element is that the statement must be defamatory. Again, you might wonder, what exactly does this mean? So a statement is said to be defamatory when it has a tendency to bring a person to hatred, ridicule, or contempt, which causes him to be avoided, or rather it can also have a tendency to injure him, to injure such a person in his office, profession, or calling, meaning that after this word is said against you, or rather this statement is said about you, people suddenly hate you, people are going to hold you with contempt, in your profession, So there are so many questions that arise as far as your reputation is concerned. So this is what you need to prove as the first element in a defamation suit. Number two, the statement must refer to the plaintiff, meaning that you must actually prove that this statement referred to you. So if person A said something about you as person B, you need to prove that indeed the statement from person A referred to you in your capacity as person B. Number three, the statement must be published by the defendant. Here what I mean is that the statement must be communicated to at least one person other than the plaintiff. So to put this into context, if you get into an argument with someone in your house, two people, you've gotten into an argument and someone says certain statements that could lower your reputation, but remember you're just two people, that will not amount to defamation, because you know what, that statement to be defamatory, it must be communicated to at least one person other than you, the complainant. So it stands to reason that if no one else receives the defamatory message, there is no harm done. So always remember that this information must reach at least one person other than you who is complaining. So defamation protects against injury to reputation and not hurt feelings. So my dear friends, if your feelings have been hurt, that may not amount to defamation, because defamation protects against injury to reputation and not hurt feelings. Now the next element that you need to prove to win a case on defamation is that the statement said about you must be false. If that statement happens to be true, no matter how mean it sounds in the public, no matter how you're trolled on Twitter or Instagram, no matter what happens to you, as far as that statement is concerned, so long as it's a true statement, it is not defamation. Now in that regard, remember to read these two cases so that you appreciate the context that have brought out as far as proving a defamation case is concerned in Kenya. Now also remember that there are certain misconceptions in defamation matters, and the first one is that some people may assume that if you're trying to be funny through your comedy and cartoons and entertainment, that you may not be held liable for the defamation. Now this is a misconception, because remember that if such words that are said during your comedy, during your jokes, are all capable, or rather if such words are capable of bearing a defamatory meaning, then you shall be held liable for defaming a person. So remember this, just because you're joking through your comedy, your cartoons and stuff like that, all these things are capable of bearing a defamatory meaning. So remember that your intention does not matter. So if your intention was to make us laugh and through your comedy, that is not relevant. It's actually irrelevant as far as determining whether your words are capable of bearing a defamatory meaning. So remember this. Now moving on to the next slide, please remember to subscribe, comment, so that I can give you any clarification on what you might not have understood as far as this video is concerned. Now moving on to one of our last part of the video is that there's a distinction between defamation, false light and entrapment. Now under false light, how do you know that you've been actually held in false light? Now by false light, what I mean is that putting someone in a situation where they are perceived to have rest of a reputation, thereby casting them in false light. Now an example here would be, now can you imagine a Muslim sheikh? Someone takes a picture of that sheikh next to 3 bottles of whiskey, yet in essence these 3 bottles of whiskey belong to someone else, and that photo is published. Now in this case, that Muslim sheikh has been cast in false light. Remember, the alcohol was not his, he does not even drink, but because the image is published in a magazine or in a newspaper, people, or rather the public, is able to perceive the sheikh as a man who consumes some whiskey. Yet according to the Muslim religion, drinking may not actually be allowed. Now as far as false light is concerned, sometimes it happens purely based on circumstances. You see, like in the example I've given you, the innocent sheikh just so happened that he was seated, or rather the innocent sheikh, it just so happened that he was seated on a table that had 3 bottles of whiskey. By the way the image is portrayed to the public, it turns out to be, or rather look like, he was the one consuming the whiskey. Now, on the other side also, false light could be as a result of someone else's negligence. So, again, using newspapers. If a newspaper publishes a story about men in a brothel, but the accompanying photo is that of a renowned sheikh. So here again, remember that they have been talking about a brothel and men going to a brothel, but the photo that is attached to that story is that of a sheikh. So people in the public are likely to assume that that particular sheikh is part of the men going to a brothel. So it casts that sheikh in false light. So this is just to bring out what I mean by false light. So the whole, in summary, false light diminishes your reputation and brand. So you could be found yourself in such a scenario. Now the last term is entrapment. Now as far as entrapment is concerned, it entails either coercion, either you can be coerced or induced to take a course of action which you would otherwise not have chosen. The key case in question is again provided on your screen. You can consider reading the case so that you appreciate what entrapment means. Now, the sole aim of entrapment is that of exposing a person to a sanction of criminal law and societal shame and embarrassment that comes with criminal conviction. And so, to put this into perspective, with the so many words I've used, if Jane, a managing director of a national city bank, is invited to go speak to a group of bankers, but it turns out that the people at the venue are cocaine drug lords. Now you see, Jane has been invited to go speak to bankers, but the audience is full of drug lords. Yeah, the person who invited Jane did not tell her, ignore this, I did not tell her anything about the cocaine drug lords. In this situation, if the media, of course, shows up to take pictures of these cocaine drug lords converging somewhere in the middle of town, this can be termed as entrapment. Remember here is that Jane risked into a situation where she would otherwise not have put herself into. Her intention was to go and speak to bankers. It turns out that the audience is full of cocaine drug lords. The media has come and captured and taken several pictures of Jane. These pictures are published, but the underlying story is that Jane was invited to speak to bankers and she found cocaine drug lords as her audience. So this means Jane has been cast, or rather Jane has been entrapped. So with these explanations, this brings us to the end of this first video on defamation in Kenya. I hope you've been able to understand what are the elements of defamation, distinguishing defamation from entrapment and false light. And as we go along in more videos to come, you will be able to appreciate more content to come. Thank you so much for watching. Remember to subscribe so that you can continue watching the entire course. Asante sana.